Hello everyone, Sunnyfall here, and as I'm sure you've already read the title, I suppose I have to jump right in and say that despite the level of nostalgic fondness many fans have for it, Power of Three is a bad arc. The pacing is incredibly slow, but it's difficult to tell that sometimes thanks to the complete lack of direction that the arc has, being more of a meander around different random events than a cohesive plot, and consistency of either dramatic tension, relationships, or character arcs can pretty much be thrown out the window as a possibility. Some of this is a buildup of several smaller problems with particular characters or plot points, which I won't get into in this video, but I'll likely cover many of them in the future. For now, I want to know why the arc as a whole failed. So, how did it come out this way? Is there anything we can point to that would explain why the Power of Three is so flawed? Well, while there are a multitude of problems that likely contribute a piece, the main factors are the way the series is written and the vision for this arc in particular. Warriors has a team of editors who give outlines of the books to writers so they can be fleshed out. General ideas or sparks of ideas are thought out for arcs, but it doesn't take much to get the ball rolling, which forces writers to essentially fly by the seat of their pants when trying to put out the next book in an arc. So it's essential for the inspiration to an arc to not just be good, but be something a whole plot can be built from. I'm sure it's no secret to most people where I'm going with this. The Power of Three's inspiration was the fire scene, about Ashfur confronting Squirrelflight as he threatens to murder her 3 kits, and then her revealing them to not be her kits to save them. This is a genuinely good scene, let me be clear about that. It's easily one of the most memorable, quoted moments from the series, one that fans still draw and discuss today. But there are issues with it as an inspiration for a whole arc. Because of this scene, and working backwards from it, Vicky Holmes was able to form a clear vision for exactly how Squirrelflight and Leafpool, and by extension Ashfur, Brambleclaw, and Crowfeather would feel throughout the arc. But the arc couldn't be from any of those points of view. She needed it to be from the kids' point of view so the shock and impact could be seen firsthand, and their lives proven a lie. And for this, she needed to not only figure out who those kits were, but come up with a plot for them to go through while they were living in blissful unawareness of the secrets surrounding their birth, which would have to be a pretty long one since she planned for the reveal to be at the end of Book 5 of 6. None of that was helped along by the fire scene. The Erins needed a completely new idea to make a mini-arc within the Power of Three, and for this, they turned to superpowers. The Erins presumably considered children with superpowers a weighty enough premise to carry the arc until the fire scene came up. And under this light, they only had to answer the question of what power each cat had to keep up the dramatic tension. For J-Paw, they evidently found this the easiest. His power isn't well-defined, but none of them are, and he's already using it and learning about the prophecy in the first book. For Lionblaze, I'm sure they figured out early on, though not necessarily in the first book, that he would have some sort of fighting power. But his fighting abilities and possible invincibility are contradicted over and over from book to book and even within some books. In Eclipse, his entire arc centered around his being afraid of his power and the bloodlust making him turn out like Tigerstar. But it's difficult to sympathize when we don't know what his power really is, or even if he's just a normal warrior who happens to have a good build. But the worst came for Hollyleaf. Vicky mentioned recently that she was able to learn the personalities of Jayfeather and Lionblaze in the early storytelling phases, and from there, what powers they would have came out easily. It's no wonder then that none of the Erins could think of a power for Hollyleaf, who was written very inconsistently even through to her death. She was a complex character, but none of the writers or editors ever pinned down exactly how complex, or what her traits and values were. So, for many fans, she didn't even become a compelling character until she murdered someone. A very strong character moment that all the Erins could much more easily focus on when they wrote for her later. Now she had regret, and that could be understood. So instead of deciding on her powers and characterization early in the arc, very late in the arc it was decided that Hollyleaf didn't have a power. But that would be a big, dramatic moment for her, enough to carry the arc on its own. And the end of Power of Three was already laid out for the fire scene and its fallout. We did get some Hollyleaf drama at the end of the arc, but it never got to be exclusively focused on her not having a power. She never even realized that until she thought, alongside her siblings, that none of them were part of the Three since Firestar might not really have been their kin. The things tormenting her were still the code, her bloodline, and now being a murderer. The powers didn't enter into it. Even with Jayfeather and Lionblaze, who the powers were roughly set for, how they were invented works in direct opposition to the reader's expectations, set up both by past precedent and the arc's writing. The way the characters tend to discuss it, as well as the way it's eventually used and used up by the battle with the Dark Forest, suggests that the powers they were born with were made for a specific purpose. And that would make sense. Cats in the Warriors universe don't normally have magic powers like this. But even in the one prior case we had, Leafpaw and Squirrelpaw having their sister telepathy, it was for a particular purpose, so the traveling cats had a link back to the clans at home. And without any fanfare, when the quest was done, the powers went away. A reader would expect these powered protagonists to function in the same manner. So if you give us a cat with vaguely mixed telepathy, empathy, and dreamwalking, another cat with vaguely defined fighting abilities, or maybe indestructible powers, and a third cat who thinks she has a power but doesn't, what is the problem these powers are supposed to solve? Whatever the answer may be, that isn't a question that was ever asked in The Power of Three, and by the time Omen of the Stars was saddled with this problem, well, they still didn't have much of an answer, but they decided there would have to be a battle against the Dark Forest to justify the scale. Power of Three on its own didn't have a story about these powers being used for anything, which is why it seemed acceptable for them to only even learn about the powers between the third and fourth books. But these cats' lives also weren't spent primarily focused on being someone's kits, as the errands seemed to be based on the fire scene inspiration. They were focused on just growing up in ThunderClan, going through a series of mostly unrelated adventures, and eventually navigating the notion that they do or do not have superpowers. So both the original foundation for the story, the fire scene, and the injected plot of the powers have no bearing on the plot the story ultimately puts forward for the majority of the arc. You may not be convinced as of yet, so I'll go through a rundown of the plot-relevant events in the arc. I'll preface this with the fact that there are moments I'm leaving out, but I have included everything that is relevant in any way, character or plot-wise, outside the plot of the exact book it is in. Book 1. The Site. Our protagonists are born. They get into trouble even as kits, and J-Kit/J-Paw and Holly-Kit/Hollypaw do a little dance for the next 15 chapters to find out who will be the arc's next medicine cat. Hollypaw takes it for a while, but she's not good at it, and J-Paw is, so they switch. Lionpaw really likes a Winkling cat named Heatherpaw, who he gets to meet in Chapter 10 and Chapter 21. These two interactions have cemented his undying love. J-Paw finds out about the prophecy. You may notice I didn't include most of the ending. Well, that's because this book doesn't end on a plot point, but instead a competition between apprentices of different clans known as the Daylight Gathering. Hollypaw wins a bout against Heatherpaw off-screen, and J-Paw saves Lionpaw and Breezepaw from a collapsing badger den, but none of this is ever mentioned again after this book, even in Omen of the Stars, when Breezepelt really should remember the cat he was threatening to murder saved his life. But, as expected, the family dynamics are only mentioned passively, or in small moments of foreshadowing, because these three kits are supposed to be ignorant to the main plot. Thankfully, J-Paw did get to find out about the prophecy, and he was using his power all book, so at least that plot can get started. Book 2. Dark River. Hollypaw thinks Lionpaw isn't loyal because Heatherpaw. Lionpaw and Heatherpaw start meeting at night in the tunnel under their territories. Yes, that is the order of events. Lionpaw starts training with Tigerstar in the Dark Forest. J-Paw finds a stick. This is important, we swear. Winkling cats go missing, so our trio meet Heatherpaw and Breezepaw in the tunnels, and with the help of Fallen Leaves, a ghost in the tunnels, and Rock, a cat summoned by that stick, they get the kits out. Lionpaw breaks up with Heatherpaw. There is a large plot running through this book of RiverClan being driven out by Two Legs and Hollypaw disobeying the warrior code to find out what's wrong and stop it. Considering she was, and will be again, so intent on following the warrior code to the letter, this level of hypocrisy really should be important. But unfortunately, in the future, they act as if it didn't even happen. As I said before, Hollypaw doesn't get the luxury of a consistent character arc, but this book is also completely devoid of powers, with the exception of J-Paw seeing Rock and Fallen Leaves, which could very well just be a consequence of his being a medicine cat rather than a use of his power. Book 3. Outcast. Tribe cats come to take Stormfur and Brook back. ThunderClan decides to send them with interest, so Squirrelflight, Brambleclaw, our protagonist trio, Tawnypelt, Crowfeather, and Breezepaw come too. Breezepaw is a brat. The clan cats drive out the intruders, where Lionpaw finds out he is very good at fighting, somehow coming out without a single wound. J-Paw finally decides to tell his siblings about the prophecy. I think it's a pretty standard opinion among Warriors fans to dislike traveling books. And it's easy to see why, because it takes us away from the plot and cast we might care about in the middle of an arc, and does little but give us a few character moments that may be important when they do something later. We finally get some closer interactions with our trio's adoptive parents, and Lionpaw gets to show off his power, but none of this is in a context we care about. Outcast is a very long, boring book, but magically it provided the best sprinkle of moments from the family plot and the powers plot, albeit sparingly. Book 4. Eclipse. Lionpaw and Hollypaw now already know about the prophecy and go home. Lionpaw is still training in the Dark Forest, and wounds gained while there do not go away. Sol arrives. In a big battle with all 4 clans, Lionpaw nearly kills some Wind Clan cats he's angry at. The 3 talk to Sol a few times, who avoids saying anything concrete and then decides to see Blackstar instead. Blackstar and Shadow Clan abandon Star Clan in the Warrior Code. Lionpaw is now bloodthirsty and scared about it. Lionpaw and Hollypaw, and Cinderpaw, become warriors. Plot-wise, this is the heaviest book the arc has had so far, and Lionpaw actually gets to start a nice little character arc in it about his power level. But Sol's arc with Shadow Clan has nothing to do with either the family or the powers plots of the arc. More than that, he doesn't even manage to have any consequences to the plot or even the characters by the end of the arc, despite being around for all the remaining books and being brought back in Omen of the Stars. He spends a lot of time with Hollyleaf, but has no more effect than he has on the other 2 protagonists, which is to say, not very much. J-Paw barely gets anything noteworthy to do in this book as well. All he does is have a vision that makes him, and by extension his siblings and clan, trust Sol. Book 5. Long Shadows. Tawny Pelt brings her kits to ThunderClan since Shadow Clan isn't doing well. Our protagonist trio and Tawny Pelt's kits fake a sign from Star Clan so Blackstar will revert Shadow Clan to normal. Sol is driven out and Tawny Pelt goes back. Sol tries to manipulate Hollyleaf. Now, in the middle of a large green cough bout, J-Paw uses that stick from the 2nd book to go back in time for 5 chapters and tell the Ancients to go to the mountains. Lionblaze is still scared of his power. J-Paw cures everyone and becomes a full medicine cat. The fire scene happens. The 3 wonder who their parents are, and each try to stop Ashfur. Spoiler alert, Hollyleaf killed him. No one tells the real story afterwards. Most people remember this book for the fire scene, but it comes on really suddenly near the end, and for most of the book they're wrapping up the plot from Eclipse and then taking a detour out of a really big green cough scare to send J-Paw into the past for an impromptu romance. The actual fire scene happens in chapter 22, and the entire rest of the plot, from Ashfur's threat to each protagonist trying to stop him to the discovery of the murder and Jay Feather's musings about him during the vigil, takes place in only the last 6 chapters. They dedicated almost as much time to time travel as they did to the most famous moment in the arc, the one that they were building up this whole story to make. Lionblaze and Hollyleaf get startlingly little to do in this book, and after the fire scene, any arcs the characters might have had just stops in its tracks. Book 6. Sunrise. Lionblaze gets into a fight with Tigerstar and gets injured. Jay Feather spends time trying to discover his real parents. They bring Sol back and lock him up. The 3 decide this is a great time to talk to him about their parents. Without Sol's help, Mousefur and StarClan just tell them. They found out who their parents are and leave him for good, but not before letting him escape. Crowfeather rejects his children twice. Hollyleaf tells everyone at the gathering the truth about her and her siblings' parentage, then tries to make Leafpool eat deathberries, gives up, and runs into the tunnels. Dovekid and Ivykid are named, and Jayfeather realizes one of them is actually the 3rd. I've had to leave quite a lot of this book out, because 10 whole chapters are devoted to the clan tracking down Sol, the cat they think murdered Ashfur. It's worth noting, we learn in Chapter 3 from Midnight that this assumption is untrue. We are aware it's pointless. Jayfeather knows it's pointless. Hollyleaf definitely knows it's pointless. Even Lionblaze isn't especially convinced. But we go through it anyway. Firestar actually tries to speed up the plot a few times by asking Leafpool to see Ashfur and StarClan who killed him, but she keeps deflecting or outright refusing, presumably because she's covering for Hollyleaf. The story here is all build up to make Hollyleaf break so we get her seen at the gathering, an attempted murder of Leafpool, and flush her down into the tunnel so we can start up the next arc with a fresh pair of protagonist faces. The powers here are regulated to mentions that they might not have them at all, something not unique to any of the siblings. The ending is all about the fallout from the family drama, but the first half of this book diverges from both plots to do nothing other than bring Sol and Purdy back, only to have the former leave again. Over the full arc, let's cover what the story did with each supposed plot. As far as the family reveal, Squirrelflight and Brambleclaw are just average parents for Warriors standards, playing a small but important role in their kids' lives, shown mostly in the beginning of the site and through Outcast. Their parentage doesn't really become important or noteworthy until the end of Book 5 with the fire scene, and then it's the main reason for the character drama in Book 6. For the superpowers, Jayfeather is using his as early as the first book, where he learns about the prophecy, but the others don't find out until the space between Outcast and Eclipse. Lionblaze's power then becomes his central driving force and fear, alongside hating Heathertail, until the fire scene comes and his arc stops short and is never mentioned again. Hollyleaf doesn't have a power, but does use having one as a reason she's special until one by one all her reasons for being special come crashing down. But as expected, the powers don't amount to much of anything. Jayfeather could have just had an above-average intuition and been a normal medicine cat. The medicine cats already have a brand of magic anyway. Lionblaze could have just been strong and reckless, and Hollyleaf could have stuck with the numerous other reasons she had for thinking she was special before learning about the prophecy. Being a daughter of Brambleclaw and Squirrelflight, being strict with the warrior code, being a great warrior, etc. She had this hero complex way before she was told about the prophecy. None of these changes would have influenced their character arcs, and none of the plot requires their powers for anything. In fact, if Power of Three really was a story about building up superpowers so that they'd be able to fight the Dark Forest for the following arc, they would have included the scenes where they were told about the prophecy, or maybe an actual scene of Tiger Star convincing Lionpaw to train with him, considering he would be the next arc's main villain. As it is, seemingly essential material like this was time-skipped over, and I think it's because neither the family drama nor the superpowers are treated like the main plot of the arc. So if Power of Three is so badly put together, why do I like it? Why have I dedicated so much time to making a rewrite of it, and Omen of the Stars? Well, that is because of what the arc did succeed in doing. The arc's real strength is in being a slice-of-life story, up until the end. It ended up as something of a mishmashed mess, thanks to throwing in some plot-heavy family drama and unnecessary supernatural elements, but because the Errands had to spend so much time learning about their cast, we got to learn about them too. And that doesn't just include the protagonists. Most of the cats in ThunderClan at the time stand out as some of the most interesting in the series, especially when compared to what we have these days with the Broken Code. Think about Berrynose, Mouse Whisker, and Poppy Frost. Each of them have pretty sizable characterizations and are popular with certain parts of the fandom, despite not getting a lot of screen time in comparison with other characters in their generation. Now think about Leafshade, Sorrelstripe, Eaglewing. Did you know Eaglewing has an apprentice named Myrtlepaw? Did you know Eaglewing existed? I won't blame you if you don't. Power 3 wasn't perfect, but it did give us a cast to love and dig into. Everywhere you look, there are more stories to be told happening in the background. Poppy Frost not only having to deal with her own near death and the death of her sister, but the knowledge that her mate loved her sister more, and she was the second choice. Mouse Whisker has a famous flirtation with a RiverClan she-cat, and continues to describe how much he'd like to fish or swim for the rest of the arc. Graystripe and Brambleclaw have to subtly fight over who Firestar will choose as a permanent deputy, and Spiderleg draws away from his mate, or perhaps former mate, Daisy, once she has his kits. That's a massive amount of characterization for entirely background plots unrelated to our main characters, especially since many of those cats don't speak much. And it's not a level that could come from, say, the original arc either, since that story moved at such a breakneck speed. The prophecies begin often had jumps of 3 moons or more, between chapters of a single book, speeding Fireheart along his journey so he could become a good leader by the end. Power of 3 is very slow. It takes 4 times as long for our protagonists to become warriors, and in that time we get to know all our characters and love them. Our main characters are pretty good too. Even when their characterizations are inconsistent, the ranges they show in terms of emotions and experiences gives us the chance to piece together more interesting characters than someone who consistently expresses only a few traits. It could have been a much better slice-of-life story if there weren't superpowers at all, and the tone did have to shift pretty rapidly when some maniac named Ashfur threatened to kill them, but considering the kits were supposed to be blissfully unaware until the reveal, it makes sense to use that time for bliss. All this to say, I actually like the Power of 3, but it's more fun to talk about than it is to read. I hope I can change that. And I am well aware that a lot of the superpower elements in this story will conclude with the, arguably, even worse arc, Omen of the Stars. But unfortunately, talking about that one will have to wait until I start writing that part of the series. Until then, I will be covering more specific topics than an entire Warriors arc. If there's anything you're specifically interested in, comment below and I'll look into them. thank you for watching, and always make sure to keep superpowers out of your family drama.